Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3 and our second full lecture of GBMT 1009. I hope the accountability assignments all went well. There was, however, a small issue with attaching or pasting the academic honesty statement to the assignment document for many of you. You were to paste this academic honesty form into the document that you submit to turn it in. You can do this by pasting the page into the assignment document and putting it all in one document. So you just put the accountability assignment below what you submit, and you send it all in as one package into turn it in. I've been informed that this has been the case in other classes as well, so there should be no issue. And for the first assignment, I accepted this form through email. However, from this point forward, a failure to put the honesty statement in the submitted assignment will mean a deduction in your grade, and you will not be allowed to send afterwards through email if you forget to, etc. So this is just a one more time warning to put that academic honesty form in your assignments. There's no separate link to submit it on Blackboard. You must put it in the assignment that you submit to turn it in. It's very, very important. And for all future assignments, it will be absolutely mandatory. That being said, I look forward to reading your assignments, and let's get started for this week. So our agenda this week, we're going to talk a little bit about the media, and in particular, how it relates to geopolitics and world events. We're going to talk about the media's role in society. We'll discuss media bias and how to identify it, fake news. We'll also talk about how important the media is in the world of geopolitics as well. You have an assignment due the Friday after this Friday, so it's due June 3rd. I'm giving it to you a little early, so you have a little more time to work on it. But we will discuss it this week as well as next week. I've also assigned some videos for you to watch, which helps clarify some aspects of the media and how it relates to geopolitics. So hopefully this class will give you some things to think about as you work on this assignment. Please do not leave this assignment to last minute. It's a larger assignment, so it will require more of your time. That being said, I'm giving it to you a full week early, so there should be plenty of time for you to work on this assignment. So without further ado, let's get started for this week. So it's important to recognize the media is a important pillar of governance, right? So we think about the branches of government. We think about the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, the bureaucracy, which implements policies. We understand all these to be a pillar of governance in a modern liberal society, right? The media is then another pillar, right? The job of the media is to inform the public about what's going on in the world, right? So that's at its base. That's what the media is here to do, is to inform us as citizens or members of the population about what's going on, both within our borders as well as outside of our borders, right? So the American founding father, Thomas Jefferson, once said, "A free and independent press is fundamental to a democratic society and allows us to live with liberty." He claimed, our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and it cannot be limited without being lost." This is what he wrote to a friend in 1786. So this is a long-standing tradition of a free press as being fundamental to a democratic society. So ideally, the press keeps power accountable. It informs the public about key issues, including those in which the status quo leadership or those in power might wish to hide from populations. This is different from an unfree press, which serves as kind of a propaganda outlet for those in power. A dynamic liberal free press is one that would hold power accountable. The news media includes both analysis and opinion, which shapes the attitudes and feelings of a population. The news media offers an analysis and reporting on all aspects of political life, including localized politics, as well as the more macro, global, and geopolitical analysis, which is so crucial in a globalized world. All of these, however, shine a light on what's important and what information that populations need to know in every different state. The media's job is to bring attention to issues of corruption and illegality, which individuals might not have the time or resources to investigate themselves, right? We can understand that for most of us, we don't have the time and resources to investigate all the various aspects of society which might influence our behavior or shape our lives, right? So the institution of the news media is dependent and built on the level of trust it holds within a population. So this trust and the building of this trust is often done through very difficult and deep explorations into, for instance, corruption or misuses of power within society. Um, One such example historically has been the Watergate scandal in the United States, which exposed the corrupt activities of US President Richard Nixon from 1972 to 1974. Including they also uncovered his illegal breaking into the US Democratic National Committee headquarters, which eventually led to the resignation of his presidency. If it were not for the investigation of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who exposed this high level of corruption within the executive office, there would have been no resignation. So we can see how important it is that journalists are able to do the work that they do because they can uncover even corruption at the highest levels of government. Another part of the news media is to make very complex subjects digestible to individuals who might not have as much background in a particular issue. For example, the opinions of populations around highly complex issues such as geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East or Eastern Europe. Most of us might not have the background of the deep complexities that these different societies have, the different historical fractures that they that exist within these societies. So it's part of the job of the news media to help us understand these highly complex issues. We can see that also that interpretation of fact, or what we understand to be fact, also can vary from state to state. For example, currently, Sweden and Finland are trying to join NATO in response to Russian aggression in Ukraine, and has been largely supported by most of the NATO allies. However, some of Turkey's political leadership has been more critical of such expansion of NATO and the bringing in of Sweden and Finland under NATO's security umbrella so as to not threaten Russia, which has historic diplomatic and trade relations with Turkey. As such, Turkish media has been much more critical of this expansion. Similarly, information and remedies to the recent COVID epidemic has relied on a great deal of trust between the public and the media. As the media has served as a medium for medical professionals to disperse critical information to the population regarding public health measures. We can see when this trust breaks down, people receive information through much more diffuse media online, through social media, etc., which is often less accountable and often not able to access the intellectuals, institutional authorities, or medical professionals in the same way that maybe more established major news publications or networks have been able to. This has had dire consequences with individuals making health decisions, often based on faulty information that they receive online, etc. So the media helps the decision-making of citizens within a democratic state and society. So the beginning of the 21st century has been shown to be a very difficult time for the news media, especially in democratic societies. Independent media and journalists have had a very difficult time getting access to information from politicians. Traditionally, politicians have been dependent on the news media and a non-hostile relationship with journalists, as it's been the primary means in which politicians have been able to transmit their ideas to the citizenry. In this sense, during the 20th century and periods prior, the corporate news media and journalists have acted as a middleman of sorts between politicians and the citizenry. In the age of social media, this is no longer necessarily the case, as politicians have been able to speak directly to their fellow citizens or even the global populations in ways which were previously impossible. We can think about how Donald Trump tweets directly to his followers via Twitter. So we can see that there's no need for him to go through the traditional news media to get his message across. So direct access to citizens, this direct access to, that citizens have had to politicians and the access in which politicians have had to citizens has not necessarily always made those in power more accountable or more reliable in the 21st century. One persistent issue, however, is that access to those in political power often relies on how a journalist frames a particular individual in power. For example, if a politician is willing to speak to a journalist, and that journalist then proceeds to write a critical article about that politician may choose to no longer speak with that journalist again, or perhaps not as openly or candidly, given the unforgiving framing that the journalist gave to that politician in a previous exchange. Or perhaps even if they didn't have an exchange, maybe the journalist has written very critically of that politician prior in opinion pieces, etc. So successful journalists are often stuck balancing a philosophical principle of providing a probing, critical, and unbiased reporting, especially of those in power, those who hold power within society, with a need to reproduce access to this political power, which requires somewhat amicable relations with those in power in order to get the sources that can back up or verify their findings. So this belief in a bias because of these such relationships has contributed to citizens and politicians to distrust media in various instances. Another major issue has been the issue of funding for the media. In the 20th century, there were only a handful of media sources, which gave these institutions financial security through advertising revenues, and the fact that media consumers had to purchase this information through newspapers or paid subscriptions. In the 21st century, the access to free information has meant that these news sources have had to rely primarily on advertising revenues because it has been much more challenging to fund their organizations and the journalism that they do. Moreover, competition is also sharply increased with a multitude of news sources now available. This has all led to less funding for deep investigative reporting, something previously only done by major news outlets who are funding expensive journalist missions abroad and the funding of these journalists as they covered stories very far away or stories that require lots of investigation, lots of time-consuming activities, right? And this often requires institutional funding. The rise of fake news has also been a challenge where particular actors are profiting off of the distrust and divisions within society and proliferating a tailored and highly biased information in the context of deep political polarization. The purpose of this media is not to provide factual account of global events, but rather to support the biases of a targeted niche audience. So such fake news exists in a context where traditional news media has perhaps rightfully, been shown to be either biased or has lost trust within a population. The lack of investigative criticism and even support for the 2003 US invasion of Iraq on false pretenses of nuclear weapons, for example, has led many supporters or consumers of the traditional news media to become distrustful, looking at the consequences of such war. Dire geopolitical events can then become accentuated by the misrepresentation or omission of crucial information from the news media. In this case, the American media's failure to expose the faulty premises of the Iraq invasion led to both the war itself and the level of consent for the war within the population, and has also undermined the accuracy of the reporting done by these corporate media institutions. Another issue is the critical thinking skills of audiences, and how this has provided a challenge to the news media. In an environment when many do not deeply explore issues of geopolitical concern, the media has had a difficulty reaching audiences who are uninterested or apathetic to the geopolitics or global crises. Often, such apathy or disconnect is fueled by a concern with one's own day-to-day life or their own individual survival. Many don't have the time to consume media with deepening austerity and the rising cost of living. Many just don't find the time to to delve into these issues when there's so many other priorities that impact them on a day-to-day basis. Many also don't have the ability, as many of you do, to develop critical thinking skills and critical reading skills in post-secondary education, which can help decipher the importance or relevance of particular events, especially if those particular events occur very, very far away. The power of misinformation has even led some to challenge the validity of elections within the US, within the United States. And we have to remember that the United States is a state that's historically synonymous with what a free and open press, institutional checks and balances, and a fair and democratic electoral system. The distrust amongst Trump supporters led many, and even still lead many, to wholeheartedly believe that the Democratic election, presidential election and its entire system was rigged in the favor of the Democratic Party, despite solid evidence that despite there being any solid evidence that this was the case. So we can see here how fake news has such dire political consequences and can actually can deepen the polarization within a particular country, even in a country that, like the United States, has this deep democratic history, especially in relation to freedom of speech and the freedom of press. More recently, we have also seen how conspiracies and misinformation has led the anti-vaccine trucker protests in Canada, which occupied the capital city and declared the democratically elected Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as a dictator or communist for the public health mandates that he put in place during the COVID pandemic, many of which were actually provincial jurisdiction, but this didn't lead those receiving this fake news to believe that Trudeau had some dictatorial power over the states. So the information that these media consumers transmitted and received during these protests were often unsourced, highly biased, or radical right-wing and political orientation, with funding also coming from other far-right activists within the United States who sought to interfere with Canada's democratic system. So that's one, these are a couple issues. Another important issue is the concentration of corporate news media into fewer and fewer hands. This has also created some serious distrust in populations regarding the media. The fact is, particularly American news media is largely affiliated with a particular political party as well as key corporate interests. The major news media, through mergers and acquisitions, have been able to discipline or silence particular views which are unfavorable to their political or economic interests, leading many to distrust this institution and the biases they hold. Sometimes a news story which you believe is from local news is actually from a much larger media corporation. The video I posted regarding Sinclair Broadcasting, a very short video, helps accentuate this point. Another example might be that Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, because he's the owner of the Washington Post and one of the richest individuals of the world, founder of Amazon, this means that there will be far less coverage within the Washington Post about, for instance, the union struggles of Amazon workers in the United States, or other aspects that might be critical of Bezos or Amazon. Whether this is direct kind of forms of coercion where management is telling reporters directly to not cover a particular story, or perhaps it might be indirect where reporters have a fear that a particular story might contribute to their firing in what is already a highly saturated and precarious occupation of journalism. So they might not wish to sacrifice their careers for a hard-hitting story that might displease those higher up within their institution. We're also seeing much more restrictions and punishments towards the press from both democratic and undemocratic states globally. We've seen punishments of the free press in North America, for instance. We saw that Julian Assange was imprisoned, or is about to be extradited to the United States, but he was imprisoned for publishing information that was deemed unacceptable to the US state and its allies. Similarly, we can see in various states around the world where journalists are constantly being silenced and even killed. The best examples are, Russia, Philippines, et cetera, where journalists, where doing the act of journalism is a constant fear, even to their individual lives. We can think of also states such as Mexico, where journalists are routinely killed for reporting on issues such as drug and gang violence, et cetera. So we can see that doing journalism is not always the easiest task, which is why it's so important to make sure that that we accentuate the importance of this institution. We're going to discuss a little bit about fake news and how to identify it. So fake news is news which is designed with the intent to misinform and sow discontent. Fake news is proliferated across Facebook and other social media platforms. Sometimes it's done by people who just get a joy from the chaos that this misinformation causes. Sometimes it's people who do so for economic profit. You'll notice that many fake news sites often offer advertising to almost equally shady or cheap products and services. So you see many of the fake news sites online, they have kind of, health food or remedies that have, that you might not see elsewhere. You see new age religious merchandise. You see unnecessary security systems, et cetera, or emergency kits, et cetera. Sometimes sometimes fake news, however, and the kind of fake news that we often see discussed in the media is foreign actors, which view it as their national interest to undermine the stability of rival states or delegitimize the leadership of such states in order to fulfill a national interest. So such rivals. So this has led many to consider whether coordinated misinformation by foreign intelligence services, for example, is a new form of hard power, which occurs in the corners of the internet and often outside the capacities of states to deter, specifically liberal democratic states, which pride themselves as not controlling or directly censoring information that their populations receive through the state. So we can see here that fake news, what seems to be kind of, the more benign seeming fake news that we see on the internet that we might view as just, a radical actor from within an individual state, or like a radically polarizing actor within the state, might actually be a foreign actor which is seeking to undermine the politics of a particular state or society. Okay. So yeah, that's just a continuation of that discussion, new form of hard power. So we're going to end here for this half of the lecture. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more about fake news, bias, and geopolitics. So stay tuned for the second part of this lecture, and we're gonna pick up on fake news. So yeah, I mentioned here a little bit about the 2016-2020 election as being a prime case about fake news discussed in the media. So if you are looking to look at this deeper, you can always search into fake news in the 2016 or 2020 elections, and there's lots of articles that discuss this in detail. Anyways, we will continue in part 2, and I'll see you all shortly. Bye.